Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Victoria. Nice to meet you.
So, if you haven't listened to my podcast, I surprise you with 10 rapid fire questions to break the ice a little bit. So, you ready to go straight in?
Oh my God. Let's do it. I've just come out of the gym. I've got my smoothie here, so I'm just recharging. Let's see how we go.
Sorry, not sorry. Right, number one, describe yourself in 3 words.
No. Confident, embodied, playful.
Number 2, something that you like that others may find weird or strange.
Intensity.
Nice. Number 3, what book would you recommend everyone in the world read?
Oh, I wouldn't recommend everyone in the world read anything because everyone's different, needs different things. Last really good book I read was called The War on the West by Douglas Murray. So that's just a book I would recommend almost anyone read in the Western world.
Awesome. Number 4, if you were Prime Minister, what's the first thing you would change? Good luck with that question.
My job. That's the first thing I'd change. I'd change my job. There's no way I'd want that job. Having been in positions of leadership, I was a leader of an event that was roughly the size of Luxembourg for a few weeks.
Wow.
And that almost killed me. So the first thing I'd change is I would resign. There's no way I'd want that job.
That's the most epic answer I've ever heard. Number 5, what's your favorite food?
I love all food. I'm kind of a steak and chips kind of a guy, despite some of the more pretentious, unusual things I do. So, I mean, I could go curry. I wouldn't want to choose between curry and steak and chips. There'd be 2 classics. I'm going to go both.
Cool. All right. Number 6, have you got a favorite part of your day?
At the moment, it's just a gym in the morning. It's kind of a happy place. I love the feeling of it, and even though I've done sort of over the years conscious dance and yoga and martial arts, I love the simplicity of man lift heavy thing up and down, man no think about problems and money and worlds and emotions, man just lift heavy thing. So that's my current sort of simple in a complex ambiguous world. It has a simplicity to it which I enjoy. I wouldn't want it to be my whole day, but for an hour it's a lot of fun.
Lift heavy shit up and put them down again. Done.
Exactly. There's a purity to it.
Number 7, what's your favorite sex position if you don't mind sharing?
This is worse than my questions. One position. I guess it's like one meal. It's ridiculous.
That's true.
Well, it depends. What kind of sex are we having? Because if it's kind of like connecty, eye-gazy, loving sex, it's going to have to be missionary, right? Boring as that sounds. Does she have a great pair of boobs? In which case it might be women on top for the view. Or is it sort of, if I had to pick one, I'd probably go the more raw animalistic doggy. That's way too much personal information to be sharing to the internet now.
Well, my audience know who I am, but I have a question around missionary and height, right? My fiance is considerably taller than me. And so when we're missionary, I'm literally staring at his chest, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, just
we can't do the eye gaze thing.
No, I see. I'm 173, 5'8", so unless I dated a midget, I wouldn't really have that issue, I guess. But I hadn't thought about that for like really tall guys and short women. Yeah, I guess this is where it has. The answer to all questions is it depends, right? Because everything's contextual. So it's like with which partner, if I was with a partner who could only orgasm by being on top, that might quickly become my favorite position too, because I'd want them to have a good time. If I was with a partner that had a particularly epic Brazilian booty, then it might be something else, right? Like, so it also depends on the mood, doesn't it? Like, as an embodiment teacher, sometimes I'm in that, warm, connecty, snuggly place where like spoony sex might be nice. And other times it's more just like, throw someone up against the wall and it's, it's borderline the police being called. So it's, there's going to be differences, isn't there?
I love it though, because you're so right. The answer to most questions is it depends. So there you go. All right then, number 8.
The other answer is practice. I always tell my students. So how do you get better at anything? If the question is specific enough, it's practice. And if the question isn't specific enough to give a good answer, then it depends.
Love that.
Go on, number 8.
What's the most rewarding part about what you do?
I just really enjoy teaching. So I was, I'm a 3rd generation teacher. It's my art. I can be quite depressed, go and teach and just be immediately happy. So I enjoy the artistry of teaching. And of course, I enjoy seeing people learn something. I get fairly kind of pleasant messages all the time. Sometimes it surprises me. Like, so I got a message from a student of mine I hadn't heard from for a couple of years. She had a baby. She just sent me a message saying, thank you to teaching me to love myself. Now I'm passing that on to my child. And I just wasn't expecting that text. And this is a beautiful baby that I'd never seen before on a text.
Was she like, shit, is that mine?
I think she'd just gone through a journey of self-kindness that enabled, in her opinion, to be kinder as a parent. I don't know about that personally. And the work I do in Ukraine is really satisfying as well. That's super satisfying. There's a big, soft, gooey part of my heart for Ukraine.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into that, definitely. 2 left. The most challenging part about what you do?
Business, running a business, being a business person. Like, in the embodiment world, I'm known as a good business person, but I'm a best average. And I struggle with it. And I think everyone in this field is like, they don't want to do the marketing, right? They struggle with that side. And some people just do a little bit. Some people are great. Some people are crap. Most of us are crap, though. And even if I'm relatively okay at it, I don't love it. I could teach for 8 hours and not be tired. I do marketing meetings with 3 hours or finance meetings. I'm exhausted, which is a sign, it's not really life purpose, but you got to do the washing up, right? You got to brush your teeth. You got to do stuff to live. And even though I've done some big things with that, I even taught, marketing through the body and how we have different patterns around money and, putting ourselves out there, blah, blah, blah. I still really struggle with that at times.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, the last one. If you were homeless and you had a sign, what would you write on your sign?
These are great. Well, technically, I lived out of a bag for 7 years. So technically, I was homeless for 7 years, though I was, executive class homeless. I wasn't starving. I was poor most of that time. What would I say on my sign? I would, my sign, well, I wouldn't want to be homeless. So I guess my sign would be something, a clever marketing spiel about the best work I could do. And having learned a bit of copywriting, I think I could make some interesting experiments. I'd probably have 3 signs and like ABC test them for an hour as to which made me the most money. So much as I don't like marketing, I'd probably use those skills.
I love that. All right, so let's dive in straight away to the work that you do with Ukraine. So I know it lights you up, it makes you all warm and fuzzy inside. Share with us what you do and how we can support you do what you do. Let's go straight there.
Okay, so my main job, so I'm known as an embodiment teacher. We'll probably get into what that is. Part of that is working with trauma. So I have a background in trauma work in various areas of conflict, and more mundanely, I train a lot of coaches. I train lots and lots of coaches on how to coach around trauma, being trauma aware as yoga teachers, etc. When the latest part of the war started in Ukraine, the invasion, and essentially it's been going on for a while and on a lower level, I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to contribute. My wife is Ukrainian. I've been there many times, and I just felt like it was really wrong what was happening. And I think, like many of us, had an emotional response. And my first thought was, I'll go fight, which is a typical blokey thing to think about. And one of my good friend Alex pointed out, hey Mark, despite being a bit aggressive at times, you're not really a soldier. You probably just get killed, but you do great trauma work. Why don't you go do that? Which I'd done before, actually, previously in Ukraine. So I was like, yeah, fuck it. And within about a week of the war starting, I think I was on the ground, first in Poland. We raised a load of money. We delivered like £50,000 worth of medical supplies to a children's hospital that was running out of drugs. And, it was pretty life-threatening for people. Basically smuggled a load of drugs illegally across the border with my good friend, Polish Pete. Yes, so that was a lot of fun. And then I started a charity in Ukraine that does trauma education. And trained a bunch of trainers. I thought, how can I have the most impact? And essentially, talking to local psychologists, they said, look, there's only so many therapists here, but there's something called trauma first aid that can be done with people from people that don't have like a 3-year therapy qualification. It's relatively straightforward. And also trauma education itself really helps people. So just knowing about trauma actually reduces the incidence of things like post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course, there was a sudden need for that. And there was a lot of people who wanted to help there, had a good network already. So very quickly, we pulled it together, did a training for like 100 people, fundraised just on the internet. People were very generous, and set that up. Second time I went, I put 2 local women in charge of organizing it. So I sort of essentially handed the operation over to them, because it was a bit sort of dodgy from a financial point of view to have a company and be taking charity funds. I mean, it was legal, we kept it all separate, but it was tricky. So anyway, I wanted them to run it. Locally run is always much better than, someone from the outside. So they're running it now. And I did another training for another more or less 100 trainers. And the mission is to make Ukraine the world's most trauma-aware country. And Lviv, particularly, where we're training, the most trauma-aware city. We were doing the trainings with daily rocket attacks and having to go to a bomb shelter while that was happening.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, it was not the ideal training environment. And yeah, they're running it now, and they've currently trained 3,000 teachers. They've trained all the teachers in Lviv, which is a sort of big refugee city there. And they're currently working on 9,000 doctors and nurses. And they've trained loads of kids, loads of soldiers, all sorts of people for free, and they're getting funding from sort of, Red Cross and local government, things like that now. So it's saneukraine.org, people who are interested, and Sane Ukraine online, because we also do daily free trauma and resilience sessions for anyone in Ukrainian, for anyone around the world, online for free as well. So Sane Ukraine or saneukraineonline.org. If people who are interested to contribute or get involved, then it's through those organizations. So a bit long-winded, but that's the short version of what's probably going to make an epic book one day, or at least a story to impress girls at bars with at some point.
No, well, that is so beautiful, and thank you for doing that, because I love how you said, how can I create the most impact? So sometimes we have to always look at the bigger picture, and not just what we can do personally, but how can I impact and help the most? So Mike, this leads nicely into the questions I have for you around trauma. So how would you define trauma?
Oh God, I mean, you could think of trauma as just the response to any overwhelming experience.
Okay.
So that's one definition. Another definition, overwhelm and powerlessness, key aspects. Another definition would be getting stuck in a fight or flight or freeze response. So people are aware of fight or flight. You have it when you're stressed. Most, I think I've been in it yet today, but that's quite good considering it's like 11 a.m. or something. It's a pretty normal thing to get stressed. You wake up, you see an email, whatever, get cut off in traffic, whatever. And we all have that response. But 2 things. 1, we can get stuck in it if it's overwhelming. And 2, it can go into a freeze response, essentially putting us more, not permanently, because there are cures and there is natural healing, it might just be for a few months or a few days, but getting stuck in what's more generally more a temporary response, where the body gets closed down, and there's a whole load of symptoms that could be from hypervigilance to hyperarousal to numbing to flashbacks. There's all sorts of sets of symptoms. And the really interesting thing is that actually it impacts so many areas of how we think, how we see the world, our sex life, as we were talking about that earlier, our politics even. And it really goes across the board. And I think it's something everyone should learn about just in like secondary school as part of the human condition. And the good news is, for the first time in human history, we have ways to manage it, to deal with it, and we're learning about it. So I think, actually very hopeful that trauma has become quite a big thing, despite occasionally being a little bit over the top, or everyone's traumatized by not being able to get their vegan fucking latte or whatever. It's like sometimes it gets a bit much these days, but actually I think it's a really positive thing that people know about it now.
Yeah, me too. And I wonder if you can answer this question, because I think it's such a big question with so many layers to it. Why do you think some people can experience the same thing, and someone can be extremely traumatized and someone can be absolutely fine with the same experience?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about resilience factors essentially, right? So some of these are known. So like past traumas actually make you more vulnerable to future traumas, right? Okay. There is such a thing as post-traumatic growth and other things, but in general, it can be simple things like if you're underslept, if you're already in an aroused state, maybe let's give an example. There's a real example from my colleagues. He works with bank robberies, right? There's two bank tellers, they're in the same place, they have the same robbery at the same time. So it's essentially the same experience for both of them, as near as you could imagine. One of them develops PTSD, the other one doesn't. Now, it could be that one of them hadn't slept, it could be that one of them had a certain personality disposition, one of them had already had 3 espressos that morning, so they're, already in kind of a hyped up state. Could be that had a historical resonance for one of them. There was something about the powerlessness of being held at gunpoint that reminded them of a bad childhood experience. There's cultural factors. It could just be completely random. Like, there is a degree of randomness to it as well. And it could also have been what they did after the event. So let's say one of them afterwards, went for a walk, moved their body, talked to a friend, got some good social support. They might have had an acute trauma response, and then a couple of days later come down from that. So, for example, that happened to me. I had a car accident once. It was pretty life-threatening, and it's basically, I was like buzzing my tits off, is the technical term, for about 3 days. I couldn't sleep. I was very hyper aroused, and I just did sort of a lot of the right things, and then came down from that. And that would have, that could have been quite different had I done less useful things. So it's a big question, and there's a whole field of study, really, Victoria. But I hope that gives you a few pointers.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. And I think there's a few key points of what you said that I'd like to touch on further. And I want to bring an example of my dog into this, and then you'll see where we're going in a minute. So I have a beautiful dog, he's a Malamute. And then if we're out walking, he's a male, he has his balls still on, so he's a full male. Excellent. If he sees another male dog, doesn't usually end well. But then after that initial interaction, he will do a full body shake. And then we'll continue walking. And I believe that's him shaking off any excess kind of energy, whereas humans hold on to it. And it's interesting, you said you moved your body. So how do we release trauma when it's not just happened? Maybe it's years later.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the shaking, look at Pete Levine's work, somatic experiencing, with David Baselli, who's got a shaking technique called TRE, trauma releasing exercise. That's one of the things I was teaching in Ukraine, or a version of something similar. There are tapping modalities. Different things work for different people. And the thing with trauma is kind of holistic in what it affects, but it's also holistic in the healing process. And I don't want to say one thing for everyone. What you'll get is very big advocates of EFT or TRE, or any other sort of branded term that someone's probably making a lot of money from in America. But then there's other things like just being in nature. I definitely have healed in intimate relationships through co-regulation, through patient partners. Other people, it's about meaning making and spirituality. For some people, yoga is very helpful, but it has to be done in a certain way. Trauma-informed yoga. It's a lot of it's about calibration. Peter Levine gives the example of shaking up a Coke bottle and releasing the fizz just gently, bit by bit, rather than, doing something too much too soon and overwhelming people again with that experience. So I think the issue of sort of trauma healing, yes, there are some great modalities. I got a lot of benefit from EMDR myself, for example. I had quite a bit of childhood trauma, and then working in war zones after that. I found EMDR very helpful, but at a certain time. Right. And there's other times when people just, it might be the best thing for them will be like cage fighting. Like one of my teachers, Paul Linden, he works with people who've been abused as kids, and he teaches them self-defense. And he finds, that very useful for empowering them. Right. That's part of the healing process. It's not just feeling relaxed, but actually feeling empowered. So all the different teachers have their different modalities and ways, and social context is really important, as Gabor Mate points out, and I don't think there's one size fits all. But certainly the basic categories would be sort of self-regulation, co-regulation, eco-regulation, like nature, and theo-regulation, spirituality. So I made up the last 2 words, but they're the basic categories of what helps people's nervous systems to come back down to a settled, regulated level, as opposed to a charged up level or a numb level.
I love that. Have you ever heard of, which I'm sure you have, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name, that I heard this used with, where someone will, and these are professionals doing this, they will take someone who has experienced trauma in the past and almost create, with live actors and everything, the same or similar, as close as possible, same situation as what happened when they got the trauma, and then create like a new story of empowerment around that. I don't know if I'm describing that very well.
Yeah, I mean, the different modalities there, I mean, simple exposure therapies where one is kind of re-exposing oneself in a calibrated, controlled way to a stimulus, you know, and that's basic sort of CBT type work, which can be helpful. I think there's sort of more theatery, improv-y versions of this as well. Obviously, you'd have to be pretty careful with something like that, with not re-traumatizing people. And, you know, the right timing with the right support and things like that. But yeah, I can imagine that being part of someone's healing journey for sure. You can think of trauma as being like stuck in the past. It's like, it's almost a memory problem. There's a way in which people are stuck in a loop. And then that, like, I remember my granddad talking about World War II, and he wasn't talking about something that happened 40 years ago. He was in it. You know, that was a live memory for him. It's not like if I remember, okay, what did I do last night? Me and my wife chilled out on the couch, right? Like, that's like a memory. It's more live. It's the way people are sort of stuck in a loop. And a lot of trauma therapies work by sort of completing that loop.
Yeah. Oh, so many questions I have around this, but I want to talk about embodiment now because it's a huge part of trauma releasing and all of that. So for those of us that don't know, what is embodiment, and then how can we do more of it?
It's not the fucking hashtag that you'll see on Instagram, I'll tell you that. So it's the subjective study of the body. So we can think of the body as an object, as a thing, you know, and in fact, society in many ways encourages to think about bodies sort of as a brain taxi, not really as a part of who we are.
Or as a billboard in my work. Like I work a lot of with women with eating disorders who always think they need to look a certain way in order to be safe, loved, accepted, blah, blah.
Right. So instead of being in your body and realizing your body is an aspect, not the only aspect, but an aspect of who you are. Like, I think we get this intuitively. Like, if someone loses a hand, it's not like losing your pen, right? Like, you get that's a part of you, right? So I think we do intuitively get this, and we get, like, if someone touches your leg, that's again different than them touching your mug, right? Unless you really like your best coffee mug, right? Like, we get that there's a thing called boundaries, and there's a thing called consent, and there's an ethical, you know, kicking a chair is different than kicking a person, right? So, like, you know, we get this, that the body is part of who we are, and there's a lived experience. But yeah, we're encouraged in various ways, you know, objectification of various kinds. So, you know, sexual objectification, manipulative objectification, work objectification, like human resources we talk about in the workplace, like you're a piece of coal or something, you know. Women tend to get objectified sexually, men tend to get objectified as success objects rather than sex objects, you know, for what we can do rather than who we are. Yeah. So society has a way of numbing us, obviously. Add to that technology, the pace of life, you know, maybe trauma means that we're a bit disconnected from our bodies because it's a painful place, or, you know, we don't want to feel difficult emotions. That's part of trauma, is disembodiment. So we can think of embodiment as coming back home to the body. You can also think of it just as a field of study. So all the body awareness arts, the yoga, the conscious dance, trauma therapy, all those things could be put under the umbrella of working.
Oh, now your Wi-Fi's gone on strike. Maybe. Oh, I think you're back.
How's that? All right, let's try one more, or I'll switch to my phone thing if not. So I was just saying, you can also think of embodiment as a field of study of these different body-mind arts, like, you know, conscious dance, yoga, and martial arts, that all see the body as a way to develop our person, not just as a piece of meat. Yeah. So the last way I would define it would be as a form of intelligence. So you can be more or less embodied, meaning you're more body aware, you can regulate yourself, more empathic, you can have embodied leadership. You know, when I'm working in the corporate world, these are very concrete skills that are very important for almost any aspect of life, from dating to parenting to business to trauma work to whatever. And, you know, I know you said a little bit about your background, like when disembodiment goes wrong, you know, eating disorders, there's all sorts of things that can be connected to that. So I think it's a pretty important field of study. It's what I've devoted my life to. If you Google the word embodiment, people will find you in my books, podcasts, and, you know, it's just what I do. Occasionally, like times I'm interviewed and people would say, "Oh, you're Mr. Embodiment." You know, it seems to be the word that's most associated with me now. And yeah, I train people in that.
I love that. What's your favorite practices of embodiment for you personally?
Yeah, and you know, you could select favorite for what, and you could say favorite when. There's definitely, I go through stages, so I might, you know, dance a lot for a year. I was doing contact improv in the woods in Portugal not long ago, which is just I'd say it's the second most fun you can have with another person. I've done a lot of martial arts, which for a period of my life was very, very enjoyable to me. I really liked that kind of aspect of it. I think you can do a lot worse than a decent yoga class. You know, conscious dance, by rhythms, I like a lot. Meditation is a good base for any, you know, I meditate every morning. That's my most consistent practice, I would say. And then you can make anything else embodied as well, right? Like, you know, when I go to the gym, that's an embodiment practice for me, though it probably isn't for most of the people in the gym.
Yeah, I guess it's getting
physical practice.
Yeah, getting out of your head and into your body.
Exactly. Yeah. So get out of your head, you know, into your body, and rather than just bouncing around our skull, which doesn't make people very happy generally.
Yeah, and I feel like I want to bring sex into it again, because sex is an amazing part of life, but the women that I work with struggle to be embodied during intimacy because they're too busy worrying about either what their body looks like, the fucking washing, like, other than being able to be in their body and relax into the pleasure. So I think embodiment in general will help with pleasure practices such as intimacy, even in terms of intuitive eating, that's what I teach primarily, connecting to your body and then communicating with your body and being like, what do I actually want to eat? What feels good? So it's all a practice. It's like a meditation practice, a yoga practice. It's not something you do and then you've got a tick and a well done and then off you go, you're embodied forever. It's a state of being. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's short, medium, and long-term timeframes to embodiment. So the more embodiment stuff you've done in your life, let's be simple, the better sex you can have, and the more in contact with what you really need to eat. Let's just talk about sex and food. They're obviously the favorite things, aren't they?
Clearly.
So clearly, it's almost a weekend. So, you know, you can't, even people who are pretty disembodied, sex and food tends to bring them back to the body. You sort of can't avoid it. These are two kind of, you know, essentials of life to survive and make life. This is why people enjoy these things, precisely because they do bring people back to the body. But the more embodied we are, the better your relationship to those two things are going to be. What do I mean by better? You're going to be more in touch with your needs. You're going to be more self-caring, you know, more in touch with your boundaries. Am I into this guy or not? You know, more in touch with food. There's a lot of people that bring embodiment into eating, obviously no diet movement, intuitive eating. It all is essentially embodied practice. You know, I'm not an expert in that, but from what I can tell, it's pretty much an embodiment movement, even if it doesn't have that word to it. And I've had a few colleagues that were very much into the sort of, you know, no diet, intuitive eating, tuning into the body. Yeah, and obviously you're going to be massively better in bed, obviously, if you're in your own body as well. Just in terms of enjoying yourself, being in contact with the other person. We need to be in our own body to be empathic and connected. And to some extent, that's a habit. You know, you might notice if you spend a whole day dancing or doing yoga or just being in nature where you're in your body, you know, with your partner, you just have amazing sex afterwards. It's like, well, yeah, obviously, you just spent the whole day getting in your body. That was all sort of foreplay, you know? It was the sort of solo foreplay before before you had sex. And that's going to be very, like, I've had other times where I've been on my computer, in my head, deep in email, thinking about numbers, very cognitive. And then I've got a date and it's just like, I can't connect, you know? And there's been times I've just gone, I'm not turned on. I'm just too much in my head. And then you can add to that trauma healing, and then add to that the bigger societal picture that makes women, but I think increasingly men as well, worried about their bodies and think about their bodies as an object. If you're thinking about your body, you're not in your body. right?
Yes.
If it's like, how do I look? That's a performance at that point. You're not embodied. And I know certainly the people that I've enjoyed sex with most are the ones who gave the less shit about their body. I mean, this is, I noticed this as I started getting older and rough. My lovers are generally my age or a bit younger, maybe a bit older, but they're not generally like 20 years either way, right? So as I've got older, I've noticed that sex has got more enjoyable. And the main thing that I think's changed is how relaxed my lovers are. In that the average 35-year-old woman just gives less of a shit than the average 25-year-old about her body, because she's gone through a journey. It depends. There's individuals, some are naturals and they're 20 years old, they've got it. Other people don't get it till they're 50, whatever. But I've definitely noticed something there of just going, I know how to enjoy myself. Fuck it if I've got a bit of cellulite. I know I'm not, my boobs are too big, too small, whatever. I don't give a shit. Let's just have a nice time. That's so much more fun than I remember what it was like being 20 and having a 20-year-old partner and then just going, let's turn the lights off and don't look at me and I'm fat. And I'm just going, fucking, I can't have a good time if you're not having a good time,
That is, so true. So instead of asking ourselves, how do I look? Or what does my body look like? Ask ourselves, how do I feel? And how do I want to feel? Not how do I look? And I love that, because I'm 35 and I've done this work for 5 years now. And when you just give zero fucks, it's just so much more free. Like,
it's liberating.
Yes, there's a role there. Who gives a shit? Like, whereas before I would so be like, I used to fake orgasms all the time because I was so much in my head, and I never do that anymore because I'm embodied and probably oversharing again. But since I've learned how to be embodied and connect with myself during my cycle, I literally know the day that I ovulate. I can feel it.
Yeah. I'm fairly tuned in to, depends on the woman, but I can generally tell where someone is on their cycle.
Yeah. It's amazing. Let's talk about self-care now, because I've obviously stalked you before as I was prepping for this on your Instagram, and you talk a lot about self-care. And personally, I believe self-care is not selfish, it's actually self-full. I never used to think that. I was a people pleaser, all of that. How do you define self-care, and how is it not selfish to put yourself first?
So I've been through a journey with this. I've taught it. And I've also had my own burnouts, like I pushed myself way too hard with the Ukraine project. And I think there's different levels of learning. So most of all, we're just not taught this at all. We're not taught to learn to tune into what we want, to say no, to ask for what we want. I think that is essentially a set of skills that people can learn. And generally we're not taught them because we're in environments where, teachers and parents just sort of want to get us dressed into school and they kind of want what's best for us. And, teachers just want to get through the day, and I don't blame them. So it's like, we're not really tuned into that. I think it does take, it's an embodied practice. It takes a tuning in to what are my needs, and as a result, what are my requests and boundaries. It's really as simple as that, as a set of skills, right? So it's okay, tuning into, what do I need right now? Do I need sleep? Do I need rest? I don't know, I look at this schedule and go, right, I've got an interview with Victoria. How do I feel about that? Okay, I'm up for it. Great, I've got good energy. You know what? I want to take 10 minutes first just to kind of change my sweaty gym clothes and get a drink. Great. Okay, I need a bit of blood sugar. That's going to sustain me. You know what? I'm not going to cancel this, because I generally keep my commitments, but, there could have been a moment where I've gone, I really can't do this. Let's reschedule. Right. And as opposed to brutalizing myself, I could have sent you a message saying, hey, really, I apologize. Is there any way we could do this tomorrow, whatever. So I think it's like those day-to-day decisions. It's not fucking bubble baths. I mean, it's not abusing yourself all day long and then, having some sort of nice middle class glass of wine in the bath kind of thing, I think a lot of it's about boundaries, relationships, scheduling even. And it's a constantly moving thing in the, like, what was kind for me today is not kind tomorrow. And in terms of, is it selfish? Well, there's no justification needed for self-care. It's its own justification. The second one is, if you're practicing hating yourself all day long, you're probably not going to treat others very well. And you're probably going to burn out and not be able to continue to do your life purpose work. Sometimes when I'm dealing with guys, they're like, you have to kind of go in through the door of like, do you want to keep doing what you do? Or do you want to burn out? do you want to see your daughter's wedding, or do you want to have a heart attack while she's 10 years old, and then the poor girl's traumatized, and she has daddy issues and marries some loser, and you're not even there to see it? Do you know what I mean? Like, what do you want? Do you want to sustain? Do you want to see her wedding and be old enough for that, or do you want to have a heart attack? And I've coached people who are literally coming off a heart attack. And I had some health problems myself recently, and I caught them soon enough to back off from certain behaviors in my life, and just go, it's worth it. So there's lots I could say about it, but yeah, coaching it is. I was coaching a mentee yesterday. It's just such a high achieving, smart, awesome human who is just so hard on themselves. And my job, basically, every time I meet her online or talk to her on the phone, is just love the shit out of her until she gets the message and starts doing it herself. And if it's to see someone who's so smart, I won't say her work because I don't want to reveal who it is, but it's like super achieved lots in life, everything you could imagine, pretty, great boyfriend, everything you could imagine, and still has all this self-loathing. It's like, it's endemic, and I think it's something we often need a bit of help with.
Absolutely. And I like how you said, if you're not treating yourself nicely, you probably won't treat others nicely too, because I experienced when I first, so really, really quick, short story. I met my fiance in Egypt on holiday, knew him for 3 months, and then literally flew to the Netherlands to live with him. So I didn't know him properly. And I remember saying to him one time, a couple of weeks after I moved in the nicest possible way, you're the most selfish person I've ever met. But what was going on, it was, I was pissed off that he was choosing himself and I didn't know how to do that. And so he was just mirroring back to me that, I'm choosing myself, as in he puts himself first. And I hated that, because I also desperately wanted to choose me and never knew how to. And then now I do. So it's just interesting how, you mentioned that everything kind of reflects back to you.
Well, people usually get resentful. Like I had the nicest girlfriend in the world about 15 years ago, and we'd always watch the movie I wanted to watch, eat the food I wanted to watch. She'd always sort of put me first. And that sounds great, doesn't it? You think, oh, this is brilliant, best girlfriend ever. But then she'd always resent it.
Yeah.
Or there'd be a secret deal that she'd made in her head that I didn't know about, that I had to do something back. That was, or then she was like, but everything I've done for you. And she was actually a lovely person, but she just was we were all conditioned by our childhood and culture, blah, 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 feminist analysis, etc. But it was actually a nightmare, because I never knew what she wanted. And you'd have to be like, and it would often, I'd say, right, we're watching Terminator 2, right? Yeah, great. She'd be like, yeah, sure. And then halfway through the movie, she'd be complaining about it. And I'd be like, fuck, you didn't really want to watch this movie. And it's just so much easier to work with friends, colleagues, lovers who actually know what they want. I mean, you can help people, right? If they're like one of the things I'll say, if I've got a friend or a colleague that's like, are you sure you can do this thing? I'll just ask, you don't have to. I won't hate you if you can't. You can help those people. And, that is a specific one of someone I know called Erica Wanders she's got a whole thing called Women Who Are Too Nice. So people can look Erica up if they're interested in that from us, because there is a sort of gendered aspect to it as well.
Yeah, that was definitely me. I would, even in terms of like, I'm not seriously talking about sex again, I don't know what it is, but in terms of like from a child, when I was like forced to hug someone and I didn't want to, like, go and give auntie so-and-so a hug, and you're just like, I don't want to, but then you're forced to like allow someone into your personal space. I like connected that through therapy to like then not being able to say no to men, and then allowing them into my body, in my personal space, simply because I didn't want to offend them by saying no. And that was linked with
super common. So common. And as a guy, I became aware of this, and I was shocked when I became aware of it. I was like, oh my God, when I started learning about this stuff, I was like, oh my God, have I been getting conformity rather than consent, compliance rather than consent? And it's not always easy to see the difference in someone who's sort of trained and has that as a pattern. And when I realized this when my niece was born, every time I picked her up, I'd say, can I pick you up? All right. Since she could speak. And pretty much every time she's like, yeah, and I was hug her and move around. And the message I was giving her from childhood was, if a man wants to touch you, he needs to ask, and you need to agree to it. And now it's really funny. If anyone like tries to ruffle her hair or something, she's like, get off me. She just won't take it. She just thinks it's weird. She's like, why would you do that? She's 12 and she had her first date the other day. Uncle Mark, not very happy about that, thought I had a couple of kids. It was very sweet, you know. My sister was in the background of the coffee shop. They had a bubble tea or some shit, you know. Some nice boy at my school. And yeah, I'm like, okay, good. Like, I'm glad I gave her that conditioning with the body, that it's like, okay, there's got to be an agreement here. And I, you know, even like my mum would kind of like touch her without asking. So I'm like, Mum, stop that. You need to stop that, because that's not the way, you know, that's not the message we want for her to have when she's older.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that, because it is, and it still is my responsibility. So the men that, you know, I was with, it was my responsibility, but I didn't know how to speak my truth and all of that. So yeah, it's not just on the men, it's on us women to speak up for sure.
I'm glad you said that, because that's the missing piece a lot of the time. It's on both, isn't it, I would say, but there's two sides to that one.
Absolutely, and I love it how us women decide that our partners should be mind readers, and then when we say there's nothing wrong, we're like thinking, well, it's obvious, but it's your responsibility as a woman, as a man as well, to share your truth and ask for what you want and come to an agreement and not an expectation.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. And women, if you're listening, treat your men like we're slightly autistic.
Yeah.
We need to be told explicitly, and generally we want to help. You know, we're like service dogs. We're like, how do I give you an orgasm? What do I do? Oh, you like it like that? Okay. But we kind of need to be given clear instructions. So yeah, the world is just a better place when people can know what they want, ask for it, and say no.
Amen to that, because men do like to be directed and they like to provide. So just women, ask for what you want. Right, we have about 5 minutes-ish left. I'm going to say a quote and then ask you to list some characteristics for leadership. So practice what you preach and sometimes use words. What do you think make a great leader in character-wise?
I'm going to turn this question around. So you could say what makes a great leader, and people will give you a whole list. They should be kind, they should be charismatic, they should be a great listener, and all those things are true. But what's normally missing is how. How do you become those things? So for me, you know, embodied practice is an answer to that. So I would actually break leadership down into a set of skills, things like, you know, empathy, self-regulation, self-awareness. This is what I would call embodied intelligence as a skill set. And those things can be taught, and they can be practiced, and they can be developed. So yeah, and I could talk for an hour on each of them. You know, what makes self-regulation a great skill, because it leads to leadership, right? Like, you know, when I was in Ukraine and I was in the training, and on day one we had the first missile attack and the alarm goes off. The fact that I didn't panic and was able, even though I was scared, was built massive trust in the group. Because the alarm was off, I was like, oh, let's run to the bomb shelter. I was like, okay, everyone take a breath. We've got at least 2 or 3 minutes. We'll walk. No way, no one gets hurt on the way. And then the group trusted me, because they were like, okay, this guy's got his shit together.
Yeah.
Right? So that's just one skill. But then that needs to be balanced. If someone's all self-regulation and no expression, you know, they're a robot. So we want to have leaders who are actually able to express themselves through the body and emotionally, and you know, that's another part of it. So a lot of these things are a balance, but I'd say the key aspect there is skills, rather than you know, that you're supposed to be this perfect person that has all these characteristics, and when you list them on a whiteboard, you end up sounding like some cross between Einstein, Jesus, and the Buddha.
That would be kind of an epic character. However, it's interesting how it all starts with you. It all starts with self, doesn't it? It's about modeling the behavior and then sharing and teaching that through you modeling it. It's like, I don't count calories in the background when I'm fucking teaching intuitive eating. I'm a model. I embody what I teach. And I think that's makes a good leader as well, a great leader.
Yeah, and I taught embodied leadership. We do these free events fairly regularly for Embodiment Unlimited. That's my company. Little plug. And we do these free events. And there was one on embodied leadership. And my preparation for that was just to go spend 5 days dancing in the woods. Because I was like, if I'm going to teach embodied leadership, I want to actually embody that, you know, rather than. And I think that being said, without needing to be perfect. You know, I remember one time one of my students saw me walking into a training with a can of Coke, and they were like, I thought you were embodied. They were like disgusted and aghast. And I was like, dude, it's sugar water, not crack. It's probably not the best thing for me. I'm not suggesting everyone drink Coke all day long, but there's worse fucking things, you know, especially as an ex-drug addict, alcoholic. I'm like, come on, really? Like, let's not hold our leaders up to this perfection, or else they just end up having to be fake and lying.
Yeah, and this is Brené Brown, who I'm sure you're familiar with. Perfectionism is only fear dressed up in high heels and a fur coat. Amen. Mic drop. Yeah, it's fear underneath the perfection. Okay, I could talk to you for hours, Mark.
Sorry, you cut out a minute there, Victoria. Is there a question I missed?
Well, I was waiting for your reaction, and I was thinking, well, clearly he's not appreciative of what I've just landed, so I'm just going to continue swiftly on.
Did you? No, it was just the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is a bit dodgy today. So that's a good example. You know, like I feel like being embodied is like having good Wi-Fi. It's like, you know, you're connected, right? And when the Wi-Fi is back, it's so much easier to be in relationship, right? Even though the eye contact's off because the camera, it's much easier to be like, oh, okay, did he like my joke? Did she get that? Am I making sense? Like we're human connecting animals, and being embodied is like having Wi-Fi that works.
What a great fucking analogy. So I'm going to say it.
That's going to be my Instagram post today. It's going to be I'm writing that down.
Do it. Okay, I'm going to land this again because I think, did you miss the quote that I just landed?
About perfect heels and fur coats.
About Brené Brown, perfectionism is only fear dressed up in high heels and a fur coat.
Oh, nice. I like it. Yeah. Perfect. Fear dressed in drag.
Is joy. Basically, perfectionism is fear and drag. That's an even better.
I don't like Brené Brown. I think Brené Brown's vulnerability porn for women, and I think she's massively overrated.
She talks a lot about leadership. But anyway, I need to let you go, even though I could talk to you for hours. I'm going to link everything below, so you haven't got to say www.blog/whatever. How can people work with you, though?
Well, there's different ways. Embodimentunlimited.com is our main website, and on there's free books about embodiment, our podcast there, if they're on iTunes, whatever. They could put embodiment into Amazon. Mark Walsh, we'll put my name, Mark Walsh, into Instagram or Facebook if you do the social things. But probably embodimentunlimited.com is the best way, just because like all our, live events and online stuff, a lot of resources there. That's free stuff for people. If they like embodiment, come and check that out. And they can check me out on social, but only if they're not easily offended. So if they're easily offended, then stay away.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Mark. I've loved this conversation, and listeners, see you next time. Lots of love. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.